Come for the bread, stay for the politics. I'm Ben Walsh, and this is Let Them Eat Bread. Today we are demonstrating a new recipe, one that we have never tried before. But before we get started, hello potentially to our Twitch audience. This is the first week we are on Twitch as well. Hopefully the quality of the video on Twitch, as well as the platforms we are on, is not diminishing. Obviously, it's my hope to always make this show better for you guys. So let's get started. So we're making a Portuguese sweetbread courtesy of James Beard from the book Beard on Bread, which you see in front of me. This is kind of a sweet loaf. I would say this is probably sweeter by a significant margin than our challah bread. So, try it. Once you bake it, try it, see kind of what you want it with. My guess is you'll be able to use it for most things, but, just keep in mind it's going to have that nice sweet touch to it. Think of it as like a sweeter cinnamon raisin bread kind of thing, but without the raisins. So that being said, let's get started. So first, we have half a cup of warm water here, and this is just kind of room temperature, microwave for 10 seconds kind of water, not very warm at all. We're going to add a teaspoon of our sugar to that. And then we are going to add 2 packages or 4.5 teaspoons of yeast to this. And for those of you who are not new to the show, we're just going to lightly sprinkle this on top. And then we're going to just take our fork here. We're just going to lightly fluff it. We're not trying to get anything to dissolve in here. We're just trying to mix it together a little bit so they play well together so we don't have to worry about whether things are combined. And it won't combine, by the way. It's not meant to combine, so don't worry too much about that. And just a little bit of yeast gets on your utensil here, just knock it off. You got a ton of yeast in here, so if you lose a little bit, not a big deal, but just something to keep in mind. So we're going to cover this and let this bloom. For those of you who are new to the program, blooming yeast essentially confirms it's alive, which is really important for active dry yeast because essentially they've taken it and they've just dried it out, and you just need to make sure that it will do what you need to do. If your yeast is not actually alive and you are using active dry yeast instead of instant or fresh, and it doesn't bubble up and it doesn't kind of create a little foam on top, you need to get new yeast, or you need to switch yeast types because the yeast is clearly not working for you, and you want to make sure that before you start making a bread which requires yeast to rise, that you have a yeast that is alive, that is active, that is actually going to do what you need it to do. So next step, we have half a cup of milk here. I'm using almond milk, but regular milk just works fine, shouldn't matter. Either way, we are combining a softened stick of butter. So if you're taking it right out of the fridge, 10 seconds in your microwave is going to make it nice and soft. And we're just going to combine that in here. Actually, I lied. We are going to combine it in here. We are using a stand mixer today for today's bread recipe because I'm in the Northern Hemisphere and it is now in the cooler season. So it is going to be a little bit more difficult since I'm working on a stone board to keep our bread nice and warm. So the best solution for this is to work with a machine that's going to move it much faster and keep that heat up. So I've just put our half cup of warm milk, and again, 10 seconds in your microwave, 30 seconds in your microwave, not a particularly long amount of time. Oh, by the way, save this wrapper. We're going to use it to grease our bowl. So don't throw away your wrapper. It's got plenty of butter on it. We're going to use that later. Now, alongside this, we're going to combine the rest of our sugar. This will be 1 cup of superfine sugar. And just pour that in here. And again, this is a lot of sugar, right? Even when we make our challah recipe, typically it's about 7 tablespoons of honey, which is shy of a cup. So, we're using a lot of sweetness in this bread. It should be a nice, lovely, sweet bread. You still should be able to use it for some savory applications, but just keep in mind it's going to have a nice sweetness to it that you don't necessarily get otherwise. So we're just going to I'm using a wooden spoon here. You can use a whisk, whatever you need. Just smush up our butter, combine everything together. You can use a whisk, you can use whatever you need. And essentially, this is just this is the base of our liquid ingredients, right? We're not going to add our eggs yet, but this kind of butter sugar mix, and it's going to take a while to kind of get where it needs to be. So no worries on that one. Just keep mixing it around. Use your spoon or your whisk or whatever you have. Even if you want to, you can put it in your mixer Although no matter how nice the butter is, it is going to be a little bit difficult to do this because the butter will just kind of slip and slosh around, and you will have butter flying all over the place. So just be aware that your butter is slippery when you do this. You can't see it, but I'm suffering immeasurably trying to do this. All right, so once that's thoroughly blended, we're going to add our eggs. There's 3 eggs here, so let's just pour this in. And just really stir it, really combine it, make sure everything's kind of coming together. And don't worry so much what it looks like right now. It might look like the butter is kind of broken up into a bunch of little pieces. Don't worry about that. It will come together. So as you can see here, it does kind of look a little, gross is not really the right word, but it looks like the butter's kind of breaking. Don't worry about that. It should all come together. Next thing we're going to do is add a little bit of salt. It recommends a teaspoon, but you can really put in as much as you want. Not more than a tablespoon, though. It's probably your best bet. Put this away here. And then we are ready to add in our yeast mixture, which hopefully should have bloomed. Let's take a look at it. You can see we have a nice little foam top on top of our water mixture. So we're just going to pour this in here. Mix that around as well. And this is all of our liquid ingredients, guys. So this is the end of the line for liquid ingredients. We're now going to start mixing in our flour. It says now to add this a cup at a time. So because we are about to move on to the phase we're going to be kneading it, I'm actually going to put it on the machine and let the machine do the work. So if you're not doing this on the machine, I will tell you how to do it while the machine is going. Just give me 1 second. So if you are using a standing mixer, my standing mixer is affixed with a dough hook to make sure that this always gets combined. Now, if you are doing this in a bowl and not using a standing mixer, you're just going to add these one bit at a time, and you're going to slowly knead with your hands. If you are doing it in a standing mixer like I am, you're just going to take it on the lowest setting here and just until it's combined, right? You're just going to let it go until it's mostly combined, or the flour kind of looks like it's coming together with the rest of the ingredients. Then you're going to add the next cup of flour, and then the next cup of flour, and then our 4th cup of flour. Now, technically, this recipe calls for 4 to 4.5 cups of flour. I'm starting with 4 as a conservative estimate. I have my flour here if I need more of it. So before I get going on to my next part, I'm just going to use this to push down into the rest of the ingredients. Again, this is just to make sure that everything is getting as equally combined as possible. We're just going to keep moving that, have it on its stir setting. If you're doing this by hand, again, just get underneath there in the bowl. Now I'm going to put in our 3rd cup. Don't turn it onto a breadboard already, right? Just keep it in your bowl, put your hand underneath, turn it on top of itself, and just make sure you're combining all of the ingredients. Now, by the end of this 3rd cup, the dough should start to come together a little bit. So if it is not doing that, my guess is you just need to add a little bit more flour. But again, when we're adding ingredients to a recipe that has pretty set ingredients, you want to make sure that you're adding it a little tiny bit at a time, okay? Little tiny bit at a time. So just make sure that everything's kind of getting combined. Your dough should start to come together at this point, even if it's not much of a coming together. Oops. And then I'm going to add the rest of our flour, but I'm still going to keep this on the lowest setting, all right? So just to mimic the doing this with your hand. Now, if you are actually doing this by hand, you can go as fast as slow as you want. There is almost no way that you are going to harm this dough. However, I'm using a machine, partially to keep it warm, but partially to make it easier for me. And because I'm using a machine, it is entirely possible that I overdo it. All right, so you can see here, just from this particular part of it on the thing, this is a dough now, right? This is less a kind of a battery consistency. You can see that, you know, we have kind of one cohesive ball here. So if you take a look, you can see, right, one big mass here. So we will still need to add flour to this because you can see it's quite a wet dough. But the flour that we're going to be adding now is just a little bit to keep it kneading. So this recipe is very specific about when you should add flour. They should say just enough to keep it from sticking. So we're going to really be conservative about how we add our flour to our board here. Now, if you're using a board, obviously, just put the flour on the board, keep kneading. If it sticks, add a tiny little bit more flour and go from there. And you're going to want to knead for about 10 minutes. Now, for me, who is using a standing mixer, I'm just going to add my flour directly to the bowl here, little bit at a time, and just let that knead until it kind of looks right. Now, obviously, I can't tell for sure unless I either use a thermometer or put my hands in it, right, whether it's actually done or not, but we're just going to keep watching it. All right, so I want to show you my bread real quick because it is really coming along. I mean, look at that. That's a gorgeous dough there. It still needs a lot more flour. So because I'm in a machine, I'm going to add just a little bit more flour here. And I may need to get a new bag of flour up in here because I'm running out in my bag here. Not a big deal. But again, you're adding your flour little bits at a time. Now, remember, we're starting this about half a cup short of what the recipe calls for. So just keep that in mind when you're adding flour to it. It's intentionally kind of a wet dough. You don't have to worry too much about dehydrating it too much because it's starting as a really hydrated dough. And we just kind of wanted to get it to that point where it's tacky instead of sticky, where it can be easily worked, where you can do the window pane test, right, where it's kind of behaving itself the way it needs to be. Now, usually, if you hear, I would turn up the speed on my standing mixer at this point, right, to get the kneading going a little bit. But oftentimes, I'm doing that in response to a strain, an audible strain from the standing mixer. The mixer is actually not producing any strain right now, so I'm just going to leave it on its lowest setting, nice and slow, kneading this together. This is a very soft dough, guys, partly because of all the egg, partly because of all the sugar. This is an enriched dough. This is a soft dough, so don't worry too much if it seems like the dough is particularly soft or it's easy to knead or it's really stretchy and nice. Don't worry about that. That is what this dough is supposed to be. So no problems there. So we're probably about an eighth of a cup or a quarter of a cup above where we would have been. So don't worry about that. We're just going to keep mixing it along until it comes together as one cohesive mass, right? And again, anytime it kind of looks right, feel free to test it. The way you test it is you put your hand on it, push down till a little ball forms. You take the ball, use your thumbs and forefingers to make a little flat plate of dough, and you just see if you can peer through it and see the light coming through. If you can see the light coming through, that means it passes the window pane test and it is ready to start rising. Okay. The other thing you can do if you don't like that method, you can do the poke test. So if you have your ball of dough and it's feeling right, push down on it. If it comes back about 3/4 or 2/3 of the way back up, it's done. And the third test you can use, now this of course requires a tool to do, is to use a thermometer. Put it in, if it's between 80 and 90 degrees, then it's likely ready to be kneaded. It actually looks like this is coming together. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this, and I'm actually going to put some flour out, and we're just going to push this down off of the dough hook. And luckily, we've created kind of a little barrier with our flour on our scraper here. And I'm going to show you it in a second. So look at that. It's really pretty, isn't it? So we're going to, same thing as before, we're just going to take and we're going to bring this onto our board just for final kneading. Now, I'm not really kneading it when I bring it on here. What I'm going to be doing instead is I'm going to be putting it into a ball and getting it ready to rise. I'm using my palms primarily to just move this around. I'm not doing the active ball shaping yet like I normally do. I'm just moving it around, collecting that last little bit of flour, and then we're going to test it. So let's take a little bit here. God, this dough feels amazing. I hope that your dough feels as beautiful as mine. So we're just gonna see. Oh, and you can see that it's breaking right away, right? So this is clearly not done. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna throw it back in the machine. We're gonna put a little bit extra flour in just to keep it from sticking, and then we're gonna put it right back in. Sometimes this happens, right? Sometimes the dough it looks ready, but it isn't. So it's fine, no big deal. Put it back in there. Get it moving. Oops. Secure your bowl to the standing mixer so you don't have an embarrassing on-camera moment there. And push that down and secure it all together so you really don't embarrass yourself. And remember, our flour is for non-stick purposes. So, and if you want to just turn this up a little bit and get the machine really going with it, get a quick knead in there, you can do that. You don't want to keep it on this setting for too long, right? Just because you're going to deal with the obvious nature of the bread, which is to, over knead itself more or less. Sorry, the nature of the machine, not the bread, to over knead itself. All right, so this isn't, all right, give me 1 sec, guys. Sorry. Come on. There we go. Sometimes it all just sticks to the thing, so happens. All right. So we're just letting this go really fast in the machine. I was too careful. I was too cautious, which is fine. Not a big deal. It is still staying together as one mass, which is perfect. It means essentially that we have the ratio of flour and of dry ingredient and wet ingredient pretty much exactly where we need it to be. So this just putting it in the machine is to get it to just kind of, to knead it to extend the gluten fibers, allow it to be in a place where it's going to rise better. So we're just going to give it a minute to do that. And once it does, we'll take it off and we'll test it again, right? Now, if you are done at this point, and I'm a little bit behind you, don't worry about it, just fine. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this dough, you're going to put it in your bowl, your buttered bowl. And actually, while this is going, we are going to butter our bowl. So I have a glass bowl here. Sorry, it's a little loud. And I'm going to just butter it. Just take your butter wrapper from before and just go all around and just lubricate this bowl. And save it. Still don't throw this out because we're going to use a tiny bit of butter to lubricate the dough in the bowl. So we've lubricated the bowl now. I'm going to set my bowl aside. And we're going to save this because we'll just rub it on top real quick to get that last bit of flour on our dough when it's ready. All right. So this has been kneading for about a minute or two. Let's just see how it is. Okay, I can pretty much take it down off here without it sticking to me at all, which is a great sign. But as we saw last time, not the perfect sign, right? Not necessarily. So we're going to take a little bit of it in here. It still feels beautiful and soft, and I can play with it in my hand, and the dough's not going to stick, which is great. It's not going to stick to my hands. It will stick a little bit, right? You'll see, but that's tackiness. That's not stickiness. So we're going to stretch this out little by little. I'm going fast just because I've done it before, but you can go as slowly as you need. Also, if you do this up like this, you can let gravity help you. And there it is, our first window pane. So you can see, I don't want to put it too far out. You can see the light coming through a little bit, right? So that means this is done. So, which is perfect. We're going to take this. Come on now. There we go. We're going to take this out of here. Same one we did before. A little bit of flour on our board. Now, if you don't have one of these plastic scrapers, don't worry about it. Just flour your hands instead. And we're just gonna bring this right on out. Putting flour on it, by the way, just essentially stops it sticking to itself and the bowl as you try and take it out. So same thing when you put the flour on your fingers, you're just helping it kind of get out the way you want it to. And it leaves you with a cleaner bowl too. So that's another important thing, especially if you're planning on using this bowl for rising, which, nothing wrong with that. So you can see my bowl is essentially clean. We're just going to put that here for convenience purposes. I will deal with that in a moment. Our dough is clearly where it needs to be. We did the window pane test and everything went great. I'm just going to put a little tiny bit of flour here to incorporate this, just make it a little less sticky. And again, we're just incorporating this last little bit of flour just to remove that last little bit of tackiness. Remember, we're not trying to make it too dry, right? That's why we added our flour a tiny bit at a time through this whole process. We were super careful, right? So we don't want to mess it up now. I'm just using my palm. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hands like cups, put them underneath, and create a nice taut ball. And you're just going to pass it. You're just passing the dough between your hands back and forth until you are seeing that it has a nice firm looking top, that the dough has kind of spread out on top. It's looking nice and taut on top, and that it just really has it looks like you jump on it, right? That's what you want it to look like. And in fact, you can use the poke test at this point to determine whether you think it's actually as taut as you want it to. I would say it's a more reliable tautness test than it is a reliable doneness test, but boop, perfect. All right, so we're going to put this in our bowl here. We're going to use the remainder of our butter wrapper just to apply a little bit of butter to our dough. This is to keep it from drying out when it rises. So you can also move it around a little bit. Now remember, it's butter, not oil, right? It will behave a little differently, so don't fret that too much. Just make sure that it looks a little shiny, and that little shininess is the evidence that it's being covered in the fat. Okay, so this is done. We've used up all the butter on this. Now we're going to cover this. We're going to set it aside for an hour, and we are going to allow it to rise, right? We're going to let it rise till it doubles in size. And so wrap it up with either a lid, not a tight fitting lid though, because it will pop off, but get yourself some plastic wrap. If you have something more sustainable than plastic wrap, I highly, highly encourage you to use that. We try and promote sustainability here, but sometimes plastic wrap is all you have on hand. And then I like to put a little tea towel on it just to make sure we keep all that heat in. Especially as it gets colder, you want to make sure that your heat is staying in your bowl as much as possible. So you want to tighten this as much as possible to keep that heat in. And you want to make sure that you've got something on top in order to make sure that that heat really stays in. All right. So we're going to set this aside for an hour. Set yourself a nice little timer. All right, we're back. We have our bread here. Big reveal. It has risen. So we're going to take our plastic wrap off of here. Now, there are a number of ways to do this next part. So regardless of what we do, we are going to divide this into 2 loaves by weight. So let's just put this on the... Come on. There we go. All right. So we're just going to... I'm just putting... I'm applying minimal pressure here to just move this dough kind of back into a ball form. Just make it easier to weigh. And then we're going to divide it in 2. We're going to divide it in 2 by weight. I have my scale here with the number of ounces pulled up. And we're just going to see how much it weighs. Okay, so 56-ish. So my brain tells me that that is 28. 28 ounces? Yeah, 28 ounces each. Okay. So we are going to divide this up. Now our thing is a little, now you can use a knife. I'm using a bread cutter. What's this called? A bench scraper. And I'm just putting a little bit of flour on it so it doesn't stick when it goes through. So let's cut this up. The dough should still be very soft. It should be a little firmer, so don't worry about that if it is. All right, 23, that's a little shy of where I need it to be, so let's just add some more to it till it gets the right weight. It's probably gonna be too much, but let's just see. Yeah, it's too much. All right, so what do we say, 28-ish? So that was 29 and change. It's 28.5. Can I add this to that one? Okay, 28 and change, perfect. Okay, and just for safety, we're going to check how much this one is. Okay, so they're pretty much exactly the same size. So this is great. So now James Beard says that there's a couple things that we can do now. So one, obviously, this is going to have to rise, but there's a number of ways to do this. So essentially, there are 2 ways to make this. One, you can bake this in like a cast iron skillet and kind of let it and kind of rise into kind of a ball shape that way. Or what you can do, or you do what I'm going to do is I'm going to bake these in tins. So I am forming these back into balls right now. And by the way, we're going to let them rise again, just as a reminder. So I'm forming these into balls right now. just real quick. But not, I mean, it's a rough shape, right? Because we're going to put these back, we're going to put these in our tins and let them rise. So here I have two 9x5 by 2.5-inch pans. He advocates for 8x4 by 3.5-inch pans. So these are going to be a little small in here, but that's okay. Just press them down, press them in. It will rise. And honestly, you can keep rising these more or less until they fill the containers. So these are my two in here. They're going to sit in here for at least another hour until doubled in size. Now remember, as I said earlier, it is quite cool and the dough is a little cool. So if you want to create some heating in your house or unit or whatever you have, you can use your oven. So I'll probably do that and just create a little bit of heat for these guys as they warm. Let me just bring them over here. And I'll create a tiny bit of heat here. And again, I'm just putting my oven on 350, just kind of, you know, an easy thing. And it's just going to create a little bit of warmth, right? We're not trying to heat these too much. We are trying to get them to rise, but we don't want to heat them too much. So lightly drape your plastic over them, lightly drape your towel over them, just to keep that heat in. And then once they have risen to double in size, either you're going to use your two cast irons to cook these in your oven, or you're just going to do them in the baking tins. And you are going to, oh, sorry. So once these have risen, we have one more egg. It's off camera. You're going to whisk that up and just paint the top of your breads. So you get a nice, beautiful golden brown on your breads when they are done. And then you are going to cook this at okay, so you're going to cook these at 350 for about half an hour. Or until golden brown. Now, as I always tell you, I think the best way to do this is to tap it with your knuckles to see if it sounds hollow. But if you don't want to do that, because that test is not perfectly exact, use a thermometer and you will essentially know if the bread is ready, because the bread will be about 200 degrees Fahrenheit on the inside. So don't take it out before then. Once it's done and it's looking beautiful, whether you've kept cooking it in a cast iron or cooking it in another pan that can go in the oven, which is the way that it's suggested to do it, or you're doing it in tins like me, make sure that it's done. Once you've made sure that it's done, you just want to let it cool on a baking rack, and then it should be ready for you to eat. This has been a wonderful, soft, gorgeous bread. I can't wait to see yours. Please feel free to send an image of the bread that you baked this week, even if you didn't bake this recipe and you're baking another recipe with me, to our Facebook page at facebook.com/LetThemEatBreadShow. Obviously, for those of you who are seeing this on Twitch, tell me how I did. This is the first time I'm ever streaming to Twitch. Not really sure how it works, so we're working on that. We're trying to get the show as many people as possible. Tell me if you like the content, and we will have our clips up and ready for your viewing at 9 a.m. on Monday. Speaking of Monday, happy Indigenous Peoples Day to all of you who celebrate. Hopefully you have off from work. Columbus was a murderous moron, so that's why I call it Indigenous Peoples Day, also because it's just the right thing to do. So enjoy that. You will have your clips from Let Them Eat Bread this week that day. All right, that is it. I will have a new recipe. I will have a new recipe and a new set of topics for you next week. I would love to hear any feedback you have. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.